Thank you for dropping by. I'm Butch.
And I'm Katie.
We're soldiers, leaders, family members, and
Nerds.
We want to discuss with you applicable leadership tools that you can take away in your Alice pack.
This is Army Leaders Improving Through Collective Experiences, or
Alice.
Disclaimer, this video is not officially affiliated or endorsed by the U.S. Army. And trigger warning, we will be talking about suicide in this episode.
My background includes over 15 years of active duty service in the Army, and I currently serve as a force management officer. I have a bachelor's degree in religion and a master's in organizational leadership. I enjoy thinking and writing about issues facing the Army. I've published over 4 articles on the website From the Green Notebook, and I've also co-authored a Center for Army Lessons Learned handbook. Outside of the Army, I volunteer as a baseball coach at the local high school here in Austin, Texas, and I also help out with a travel baseball team.
Awesome. And my background is 18 years in the Army so far. I have a degree in audio engineering and entertainment business, a master's in social work, and I'm also a master trainer in applied suicide intervention skills training and an Army Master Resiliency Trainer, or MRT.
And I am as well.
Yes,
so
you
we
are.
have 2 MRTs on this topic discussion. Today we want to discuss with you the topic of suicide prevention. Recently you may have seen in the news the unfortunate passing of Staff Sergeant Michelle Young, who is a very popular National Guard soldier and social media influencer who succumbed to suicide and was a victim of suicide. So she left behind a daughter, a loving family, lots of leaders and other people who love and miss her. We both served on the People First Task Force, had somewhat of a small part of suicide prevention writ large across the Army. So we're going to share a little bit of our personal experiences and some ways to get after that problem set. So I'll pass it off to Katie if you have anything to add on that.
Sure, thanks. So unfortunately, suicide is actually the leading cause of death for Army soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
Tragically. Our numbers are pretty tough to hear, but I'll go through some that I think are important to talk about. 328 active duty soldiers, 117 National Guard, and 74 reserve soldiers dying by suicide. That's 2021. The Army is reporting the worst quarter of death since 2017 was the first quarter of 2023. The 2023 National Veteran Suicide Prevention Annual Report continues to report veteran suicide increasing. Of 2021 reported United States suicides, 46,412, 6,392 were veterans.
So suicide is a very wicked problem. There's no one solution. It's not a cause and effect type relationship like other common social problems that we face. But in the Army, it's becoming a very big, wicked problem. And Katie read off all the statistics. It's very tragic and sad, but it seems like the problem is getting worse. So we want to do this podcast to kind of highlight some things you can do. The DoD commissioned the Suicide Prevention Response Independent Review Committee report, and that was early last year in February of 2023. And it had some good statistics on what are the common stressors that soldiers face, unfortunately, before they take their lives. The most common stressor was relationship issues, with 44% of those people who committed suicide had that relationship stressor. The next one was legal and administrative actions, so soldiers under investigation going through any UCMJ action, that was around 23%. The next one was work-related stress at 12%, and the last one was financial stress at 7%. So the good thing to be aware of as a leader is if your soldier is encountering these issues, these stressors, to be more aware of their behavioral health and try and get them care. So that was just some statistics in the SPERC report. So lots of good stuff in there. I advise any listener to dig into that report. The key thing to remember when we're talking about suicide, as I said before, there's no one solution that works for everybody. I'm different, Katie's different, your soldiers are different. What works for one person does not necessarily translate to another person, which is why a broad policy, a broad resource grab, like getting more behavioral health professionals, that may not solve it. And the CDC website says that. They recommend a very comprehensive approach. So seeking clinical and non-clinical care, having connectedness with others, having strong family and friend relationships, healthy outlets to relieve stress and getting enough sleep and exercise, which I think often we underlook in the Army, getting enough sleep and exercise. But this is kind of a comprehensive approach the CDC recommends to prevent suicide.
Yes, we are all different, and we all have maybe different avenues towards those moments where we might think suicide is the solution to our problems, or that we are now having thoughts of suicide. The other hopeful side of that is we are all different, and we all are capable in some way of assisting someone who might be thinking about suicide, because we might be just the right kind of person that thinks the same.
Right.
So that still continues to bring me hope that our diversity with the Army, within our community, across all of the United States, because we have so many options, maybe that makes it more possible that we do find that connectedness, like you noted, right? Connectedness is so important. So that makes me at least hopeful that we can move in the right direction.
Right. So this is a very grim topic, I know, but that's very important, Katie, that you highlighted the hopefulness of it. So I read a study that said the suicide doesn't necessarily occur in a vacuum. It's a individual act, but that person, before they commit the act, usually reaches out to someone. So that's the goodness that you hit on, Katie, is that person reaches out for help. And the good thing is that trained person can get them the right help if they have the courage and whatnot and the resources to give them the right help. One of the main problems, I think, in the Army is our behavioral health system is overburdened, overworked. What the Army is currently trying to do is get more resources, get more professionals out there, especially to the high number of soldiers at Fort Cavazos, Fort Liberty, and various other installations that have a high population of soldiers. Yeah. So we're trying to get more professionals to those high population areas across the Army. But there are still stories that I've seen on social media, especially at Fort Cavazos, is soldiers wait many months for appointments. That's the unfortunate thing. So if someone does need help, they don't have that access. And with the budgetary requirements of the Army, it takes time to get the money, to get the people, and then the people have to go there. So it's going to take time. That's the unfortunate thing. But some units, I want to highlight a hopeful message, some units have tried a triage system where they connect that person with a behavioral health professional early on, and they determine the severity of their issue. And then they do the triage, they decide whether or not they need the intensive care or if they need a little bit more lower tier mental health care, whether that's through a military family life counselor, also known as an MFLAC, or see the chaplain or another individual. So that's a good news story, is we're trying to work through that issue of not having enough behavioral health professionals to address the entire force, to provide care for the entire force.
A lot of thoughts swirling around that, but I will say, yes, behavioral health, absolutely critical. And that is a clinical care. So I think that prevention employed properly, particularly with suicide prevention, is we shift over the intervention where we're providing someone, just like you said, maybe a non-clinical service, which is your MFLEX or Military One Source, where they have mentors and coaches. It's definitely a different type of treatment. It's not for suicide. If we're there along the path and we're at a crisis moment, that's not your non-clinical services. Your non-clinical services address maybe some of those issues that kind of stacked up that got you to that point. So we're talking about someone that can maybe help you find a rudder in life, maybe coach you to your goals, maybe coach you on how to be more assertive at the office, or whatever those things are that maybe are getting you down in life. Your healthy relationships are not working out the way you thought they would. Those types of things that might incrementally push us towards that suicide thought can be addressed earlier with a non-clinical solution. And what I love the most about the Military One Source solutions, the mentors, which mentors and coaches are different things. Mentors are someone who is an individual that has kind of been through your life experience just like you have had. So someone who might have they are dual spouses and they went through the military as a dual spouse and these were their experiences, and then they help someone who else is also a dual spouse and they're like, I don't know how to overcome this, it's so crazy. That's a mentor. They kind of guide you through those issues. A coach elicits your own responses. A coach has a license and they can sort of just ask you the right guiding questions to get you to the answer that you're targeting, to get you to the goal that you're trying to achieve. The amazing thing about the mentor and coaches is that you can keep them your entire career. You don't have to go to a new behavioral health provider and explain your story over and over and over again. If it's just a non-clinical issue, you can use a mentor or coach to address
Oh wow! Yeah, I didn't know
your
it stayed
life
the same.
adjust. I know, and it's
news to me.
and if you don't like them, you're just like, well, it's not working out. Oh, I want to try a new one. But if you find someone you love, you can stay with them from duty station to duty station, and that really, to me, that makes a world of difference. And that again is maybe just one more life connection. Yes. And then of course another non-clinical solution is the MFLEC, or the Military Family Life Counselor.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. I just wanted to speak on that because I was the operations officer at the People First Task Force, and MFLEX came up routinely, as Katie can attest, especially at Fort Cavazos, which has I think the highest number of MFLEX in the entire Army. But the thing I will leave the listeners and leaders listening to this with is contact your installation point of contact that handles the MFLEC program. It's usually at the garrison level and the G9 cell. Reach out to them because they will tell you how often they're utilized, what they're seeing. It's, again, anonymous. There's a lot of things they can't share. It's confidential, but they have a lot of good data that they can share that will help a leader as far as what are common stressors, what are the common ranks, ages, stuff like that. That's good to know as a commander, but I definitely want to hit on the INFLEC program. But the thing is, there are ways, there's flexibility, which I didn't know. I've been in 15 years in the Army and I'm a major. I didn't know there was so much flexibility to shift counselors around. The good news is if a MFLEC is being less utilized at one unit and they can help at another unit, you can do a request form, they can process it, and they can shift that person to another unit who may be facing more stressors. And things like pre-deployment, going to a CTC rotation, doing an FTX, those are higher risk units. So if you know as a commander you're going to NTC in 3 months, you can request more MFLEX and try and work that through your installation point of contact. So that's the good news story. And I know we're in a fight for resources, but I will tell you, having been the ops officer essentially of the MFLEC program for the People First Task Force, there are some MFLEX that can be better utilized at high risk units as they enter those training pipelines. And I'll pass it. I think you had a comment as well on that.
I would also say that in that sort of gray middle ground between our clinical and non-clinical care lays a inherent resource that we have in almost every organization, which is our chaplains.
Yep.
As a social worker, I understand and have experienced that those who are spiritual do find a lot of comfort in the chaplain as a emotional support, or maybe might feel comfortable talking to someone who associates with the spiritual realms. But guess what? They don't have to.
Right.
And a lot of chaplains really do an exquisite job walking that line of not pressuring or proselytizing for whatever faith they might represent, but still capable and ready and just willing. If anyone is willing, it's your chaplain to be there in a moment of need. And it doesn't have to be the crisis moment. Again, let's try to capture whatever's happening that might lead up to thoughts of suicide early on in the process. The earlier, the better, right?
Yeah, I think. Well, sorry to cut you off.
No,
I think
go.
Yeah, having my degree is in religion, so I like speaking on a little bit more spiritual matters. But I think there's a common stigma even now. I think being in the Army 15 years that I haven't really seen the past. I would say whenever I was a lieutenant or captain, there wasn't much of a stigma with going to the chaplain. I think that's more common now, but it's unfortunate that that is there because the chaplains are an asset. They're a command asset, and if anything, even if you have very different spiritual beliefs from that chaplain. I had a Catholic chaplain at my last unit. I'm a Protestant. I'm a Baptist. There's still common ground. If anything, they're just there to listen, which is helpful, I think. So I know a lot of people have that hesitancy to reach out to a chaplain because of the fear of being indoctrinated or whatnot. But most of them do extremely well at that and not crossing the line and just being another person you can go to with problems. And again, confidential care, but I mean, it's another asset that the command has, and a lot of them walk around the motor pool. They go to field training exercises. They're there with the unit. They're embedded. They're part. They know what's going on in the unit. So yeah, it's. I think it's very unfortunate. Just since I grew up a little bit more spiritual than most people, it's just another asset. So yeah, that's a good point, Katie. Is that we need to use our chaplains more. I hope that stigma gets reduced over time. But yeah.
And talk about a professional listener. That's a lot of what goes into supporting someone who is having thoughts of suicide is listening.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I want to tell you about the only evidence-based intervention methodology which has any statistical efficacy is reduction of lethal means, namely firearms.
Yeah, the biggest statistic that jumps out to me whenever I read this SPIRC was 67% of suicides in 2021 were conducted by firearm. So storing these lethal means and having those measures in place, that it's going to prevent suicides. I know it's a very difficult topic for most people in the military because we strongly believe in firearms and we're around firearms all the time. I read a recent article on, I think it was Task and Purpose, that discussed they think that our attitudes around firearms are a little bit more relaxed because on deployment, you sleep with it. Like I remember in Afghanistan, my M4 was in my bed with me, or in my rack. It was close by, within arm's length. You take it with you to the bathroom, and at times during our deployment, take it in the shower. It's with you all the time, so it's hard to have that kind of I guess to be more standoffish with your firearm because again, it's ingrained in us in the military to always have it within arm's length, always have it ready to go. And I own a good bit of firearms. I know it's a very contentious topic to have your gun locked up or have the I think it's the breech lock in it. I know it's very contentious, but it is data proven to prevent suicide. So that's something we need to have these discussions. The SPIRC, that was a key point in the SPIRC, was getting these locks on the guns, tracking gun purchases on installations, tracking ammo purchases on installations, and having those tough discussions. Right now you can't really force your soldiers, if they live off post or on post, I think, to store them that way. But I think just having that conversation during an initial counseling or informal counseling, whatever discussions as they have, you just have to kind of talk about the data, because the data is there that if you're putting your firearms away safely, it's going to reduce the suicides. So that's something we at least need to talk about before any mandate or policy comes out. Nearly 70% of suicides are committed by firearms. So that's something we need to look at.
Well, as a soldier, I would also say that I respect the firearm. I don't know, more. I guess because prior to when I was a civilian, I wasn't around them maybe as much. It was more just like straight ignorance. Mm-hmm. But now I understand, in all of our habits that are ingrained in us, like up and down range and just thinking about where our muzzle awareness and all those things, that's a high degree of respect that we are building into our culture, at least from my own personal experience. I'll speak for myself. Mm-hmm. But with that, if we do truly respect what that firearm can do, I feel like we should be okay with putting a gun lock on it. Mm-hmm. And understanding that maybe in a home non-combat environment, that having a barrier in place between a thought of suicide and the means to act on that thought, having some disruption or interruption between one and the other, proven efficacy by data.
And another thing on that, Katie, and we'll highlight this we'll put the link of a study I read a few days ago, is that the decision cycle for, I think it was 48%, almost half of suicides is within 10 minutes. That person makes a conscious decision.
Yes.
I will use a firearm to commit this act. So again, like Katie said, getting in that decision space, having that lock, having that barrier to reduce access, and then get in that decision space. And there's, again, we'll put that study on here, but I thought that was interesting as well, is that usually, as I mentioned before, that person reaches out to someone else and then they go after the firearm. So if there's a lock, it's behind a locked door or some kind of barrier that gets in that very quick decision cycle, it will help, and that the data proves it. So that's a good thing I wanted to highlight. But yeah, good points, Katie.
Thanks. So good news about firearm safety is that there are programs available to get free gun locks. I'll put it in the links in the description, but there is Project Child Safe and the National Shooting Sports Foundation that offers free gun locks for service members and veterans.
Unfortunately, I still think the stigma of seeking behavioral health exists. One thing I think leaders should schedule those behavioral health appointments, set the example that it's okay to go get help. We need healthy soldiers just like any other health issue. Not to downplay suicide, but if there's a soldier is sick, they go to sick call, they go to the hospital, they get help. So just like suicide, if there are problems in that arena, in that realm, the commander has to set that standard that, hey, I'm having problems, I schedule a behavioral health appointment. It's a problem we all face, and that just kind of eats away and reduces the stigma. So
I'm glad you said that. Both support behavior and modeling the behavior. But there's one other element, and that is being an actual intervener in the process. Leaders are the ones who should know their soldiers to the degree that they could recognize when something is wrong. And I do have a personal anecdote that I'd like to share where a fellow soldier was actually a different nation from me. They had gone through a pretty brutal breakup when they PCS to another location. But we had stayed connected as just friends, even though she was my peer. She kept reaching out, and just the words that she was saying, like you said earlier, they'll say something or it'll sound a little off. And finally, I just said to this other soldier from another nation, I think it's time you go see a professional. And she literally said out loud, do you really think it's that serious? And I said, with all candor, yes. It really is that serious. And I think not just showing that, yes, I'm willing to go to a behavioral health provider, modeling, or, yeah, sure, I'm going to make time in our schedule so you can go get your medical services, supporting. But that intervention and connection piece from leader or even friend, soldier to soldier, that's a critical element of trust that we need to build within our force.
Yeah, it's trust, and it's also courage. I think that doesn't get spoken of enough, and it's a critical value in the Army, personal courage to know whenever you need help, and then as a leader, know when that special someone or that soldier under your charge needs help, to have the courage to act on it instead of being left with survivor's guilt and a bunch of what ifs.
And what are you risking, right? Happens, embarrassment. Like, hey, are you suicidal? No. Oh, okay, my bad. Like, I'm just a little embarrassed for that moment. That's what I risk. It's worth it. It's worth the moment.
Hopefully it saves that person.
Agreed. I will say, though, that while I say most people show some signs or speak or say or do things that might indicate that they're in some sort of crises, they're not always there. Those breadcrumbs are not always there. We have a dichotomy here in the Army of our culture where, yes, we have those who struggle and they overtly show signs of that struggle, and they're maybe messing up and they're doing some risky behaviors or whatever might be going on. That's easy to identify. But then we have this other side of pressure cooker level, up tempo, intensity, perfectionism of being the best soldier you can be, doing the best, being the best, doing it every day, doing it to your absolute maximum, and trying to meet those goals can also be exactly what masks what's hiding underneath the pressures and the ideas that come to mind when I'm thinking about suicide. I can't show those things because I have to be the model soldier. So that perfectionism or eliteness that we have is this crazy dichotomy that we might have in the army that we should also recognize as leaders. We can dial down the pressure to ensure that we don't create a culture of perfectionism that might result in masking the signs of imminent suicide.
Yeah, and just to tell a more personal story on that. So two of my friends committed suicide, and they fit that criteria. There was no breadcrumbs. Essentially, they didn't have any of the stressors that the CDC really mentioned. One of them was my former gunnery sergeant who committed suicide several years after I departed the unit as platoon leader. He was Ranger qualified, 101st Airborne, Sergeant First Class, just made Sergeant First Class, promoted, family of several children, loving wife, and it's, you scratch your head like he didn't meet any of those criteria, so he was that top dog in everything, PT, gunnery.
Yeah.
I mean, he was the best, and it's like you said, Katie, you kind of hide it because you're so focused on competing and doing your best that any sign of weakness, you just don't let that show. I think some people are really good at playing that part. And unfortunately, a couple of years ago, whenever me personally, I was going through some tough times, I talked to one of my other friends who was a major who retired, and he committed suicide. And we talked like every week on Facebook. Just, I never knew anything bad was going on because he lived in Tennessee. Again, loving spouse, no kids, but he had his life set. He was doing great things. He was helping his community there, I think back in Tennessee, and I talked with him every week, and he was there to lend an ear for me to kind of vent. And I found out a few days later he killed himself, and it's you see the in loving memory website and whatnot for the funeral. So it's just sad because I just want to emphasize the CDC says, okay, here are the stressors, and we always train the Army. There are warning signs. We should know warning signs, and we're trying to make this problem fit in a box whenever it doesn't really fit in a box. And leaders, I know it's very frustrating for us because we want to, if this, then that, if this person experiencing this, then they will do this. And it's not, I can tell you from two personal unfortunate cases that was not the case. We lost, two outstanding individuals to this problem, but it's a wicked problem. I just wanted to share that because sometimes I know it's very frustrating for a friend, loved one, or a leader in the Army that a person can commit suicide in their life, and whenever really there's no clear stressor, and that's so frustrating. But again, this is the problem we're dealing with. I just wanted to share that for the group. And I think there's another video I saw online a few weeks ago when I was researching this topic. It was by an English soccer club, football club. I think it's called Leicester or something. I'll send you the link, Katie. But it's great because it shows these two men who go to the games together, and they ask each other how they're doing, how their families are, and it's really interesting to me because you see one person who's getting in on every play. He's up, he's standing up, he's cheering, and the other guy who he's talking to, I think he's having marital issues or his kids having issues, and he just looks very depressed. And you're like, okay, I think I know how this video will turn out, and it turns out the guy who was cheering, who was the caring individual trying to help that person, he's the one at the end of the video that commits suicide. But it was a great video. It's like a minute long short that I think is valuable, but it kind of hits on those two personal stories that a person can meet all the signs or not meet any of the signs and still commit suicide. That's why it's such a wicked problem. But yeah, I think it's very good to have this discussion. Yeah, good points, Katie. Thanks for kind of letting me expand on that a little bit.
No, thank you for sharing. We really appreciate it.
To finish up, we're gonna cover some lessons learned, some best practices that you can put in your Alice pack. The first one that I think will help leaders is what kind of spurred my thought on this was we conduct a intelligence preparation of the battlefield, an IPB on the enemy, but what do we do for our soldiers? It's up the trying to get after suicide is knowing your soldiers on a very intimate level. One thing that helps me as an introvert, and I was sharing with Katie, is I try and write. I take so many notes. I observe. I listen because I'm an introvert. I just don't enjoy talking as much. But one thing I had as a company commander, I had as a headquarters company commander over 300 people, and I would interact with hundreds of people every day. Whenever I noticed something, I would write it down. This private first class, this sergeant acted this way. Whenever they are in the zone, whenever they're performing well, they do these few things. Whenever they're performing poorly, they do these things, and it kind of tips you off. And I would share, me and my first sergeant would share those notes, and it's just a way I think leaders could take that practice and just try and keep notes on people, because it's very hard to remember 300 personnel and their little isms and how they behave, and it's hard to catch or not catch, trying to notice things whenever they're different. So what helped me is I kind of had a little note card on people, and I knew their personal problems. If their grandpa was in the hospital, I would write it down and find a way to organize it and track that over time. And again, it comes down to listening, observing people, and just I think there's a way to make it a little bit more routine, as you would say. Yeah.
Again, I love that routine. How do I build it into our regular program of operations? So when I was a first sergeant, our company during COVID ballooned up to 650 soldiers with 4 NCOs. Just
pretty
saying.
Difficult.
Yeah. So we needed to know these people. So we had soldiers as they in process write a quick bio, tell us about their life, tell us about their family, why did they join the Army, and then the nuggets of gold to keep them motivated throughout their time with us was to kind of gather those things. What keeps you motivated? And then we had same 3x5 cards.
Yep.
And the platoon sergeants could have those 3x5 cards of the soldiers that they had there, and then when they encountered any sort of adversity, even something as simple as a crappy rainy day at PT, they could be like, hey, remember your daughter? Yeah, you're doing the things for them. And then you'd get some giggles and some camaraderie, and it had meaning just beyond a one-on-one. Everyone sort of shared in that motivational aspect and learned more about each other, which was great.
I know it adds to that leader's workload, but I think the benefits are just off the charts whenever you know something very intimate about that person that positively influences them and has a prevention aspect. If I know those intimate things, I know how to properly influence them, or if something is wrong, I know how to help them. That's just, I know, but having all these notes, and we all have smartphones. I mean, you could do it digitally as well to make it easier, but I think it's up to leaders definitely to put that in your pack. So yeah, that's a good point.
We haven't done it, but digital is an option.
Digital's a way.
As part of a best practice for intervention and intervention planning. So let's say, yes, we've identified a crisis. Yes, we know we need to intervene and make a good plan moving forward. Part of that plan is always identifying who you can call if it gets bad again, right? So we might have dialed it back and we're like, okay, yes, I agree that maybe right now suicide's not the option, but that doesn't mean that's going to be the state forever, especially since clearly someone's going through something very intense. We have 988. Great crisis line. You can always call someone. You can always call a crisis line with someone so they can feel comfortable with that. But what could be better?
So my idea was to have, I called it Operation Ripcord. The idea is like a reserve parachute whenever everything is spiraling out of control. there's that one person you can contact. My idea, to expand on a little bit more, is we have so many soldiers in our formations. We all usually experience similar things. So if you have a NCO officer, warrant officer, who's been through a contested divorce, who's been through a legal action and overcame that action, they can volunteer their time and say, hey, I can be a ripcord for the people going through this. They can call me, they can make themselves available, have that informal counseling, just kind of sponsor, as it's similar to a sponsorship program where that person speaks on their experience. It's good for the person speaking on it, and it's also good for the receiving audience. So my idea was to expand that, make it a little bit more structural, and have these designated people. Of course, it requires that person to volunteer their time, but I don't think there'd be an issue with it. So for me personally, I've gone through a divorce, I've been through a legal action. So I can speak on those things and how I personally overcame them. It's powerful for me to share and just help those soldiers and up and coming leaders overcome it. So I think that would be a good thing to do. So I called it Operation Ripcord. Just like whenever everything's going to going to crap, and the 988, again, you're talking to a total stranger. I think it would help if it was an NCO or officer who has gone through the same stuff you're going through and overcame it, and they can help you. I think that would be very powerful. But yeah, that was
I think that'd be amazing too for a leader asset, for someone who's within the force, within the organization, someone who's already built trust within the organization, is maybe not a professional, but again, like we talked about at the beginning of the episode, having diversity, not just in the crisis we might face, but having diversity in those who might help us overcome it.
Yeah, and I think the SPERC says it as well, is we know resources are burdened, so we have to think very creatively on how to get after this in other ways. And I think that's a great way. Is we have, again, you don't have to be like a licensed counselor to just help someone. That's how I do this problem. Just care. And then you can get them if it's a serious enough event, you can get them the emergency care that's required. But if we're talking about more of the prevention stuff, that person can coach, mentor, and get that person the right
head it off before
it gets even worse.
Go down that path.
But we know resources are tight. We know it's difficult to get more money and more people. So I think that's a very
always do more with less, right?
That's right.
We get it. I just don't think that there is. I've never encountered a shortage of caring in the U.S. Army.
Yep, that's right.
We could go on for another 6 hours about this topic. Hopefully you felt our passion. But we will leave you with one last note. Don't forget that while we are in the Army community, there is a larger community of support in the local areas for each installation or organization that might not be on an installation.
Yeah, the common thing as leaders, I think we always look within. We always look within the Army. We think we're so isolated. This is not an Army problem. The other services face it. There's other services in the military that face the same problem, that we can share resources. And also, you can look into the community. And one of the things that I helped 4th Infantry Division with was there's several nonprofits in Colorado Springs that specialize in youth suicide. So I reached out to them and just kind of helped them connect, because maybe there's lessons learned, best practices, workshops, training that the Army doesn't provide that those nonprofits can provide, and those soldiers can attend those for limited, low to no cost, or just on their own. And there's, again, the entire country and I would say world is facing the suicide problem. It's not just the Army. So there's a lot of goodness to reaching out to your local community, seeing what they offer, and just getting after those resources. So that's what we want to leave you with for your house pack.
Seems pretty big theme woven through both videos that we've done so far, is being involved in your community really does make a difference.
It sure does.
So don't forget that resource is there.
If you or someone you know is in need, please contact an official crisis line or reach out for help through 911.
We really, really appreciate everyone watching today's video. We know this was a tough one to get through, but it was a worthwhile topic, and you can see that we're both really passionate about it. So if you like the video, please like, subscribe, all the nonsense for YouTube. And we hope to see you again next week.
Yep, take care, everyone. Bye.